Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Rosh Hashana Daf Yud Dalid is completely about the continuing discussion that the Gemara is involved in, and that is what is the defining moment of various different types of produce that identifies which year they belong to. What stage of growth is the key moment at which we say, okay, now we know that this fruit or this vegetable or this seed plant belongs to a specific year. The Gemara is in the middle of a discussion about seeds. The Gemara is going to bring three statements of Shmuel and show why we need them all. Then the Gemara will get into types of grain. The Gemara is going to want to know what is the source in the Torah for how they are defined. And the Gemara will also discuss vegetables and what their source is. That'll give us a machlokes as to what exactly the halachos of these vegetables are. The Gemara will explain the difference between the opinions. Then the Gemara will get into fruits. And fruits we had seen have a different defining moment. The Gemara will explain what it is and where it's derived from. And the Gemara will bring an incident, a brisa quoting an incident with Rabbi Yishmael, with Rabbi Akiva, and an esrog. The Gemara will try to explain what the halacha of an esrog is, if an esrog has the halacha of fruits or vegetables. And the Gemara will explain what Rabbi Akiva was doing and where he got his position from. So our two primary sugyas, therefore, are vegetables and esrogim. Vegetables and esrogim and other types of fruits and how they compare to esrogim. So the Gemara, first of all, in the beginning, we're in the middle of a discussion about three statements that Shmuel made. And the Gemara wants to know why we need all three. What are the three statements? So first of all, he said that the halacha is ein bila. That means if you have a mixture of dry ingredients, even if they're very powdery, small ingredients, they're all mixed together, you cannot assume that they're evenly mixed. And if you take a scoopful or any small unit out of the mixture, you don't know that you've got both ingredients in there. You may have only one. If it's liquids, then you could assume you have both ingredients. If you have a mixture of different types of wine or different types of oil, you could assume that any cupful will have both units in it. So that's the halacha of Shmuel, which is called ein bila. Next halacha, he said, is that the halacha is like Rav Shimon Shazuri, where he said that if you have a mixture of different types of Egyptian bean, of pula mitzri, some from this year and some from last year, and you take a scoopful, you could take a scoopful and use that as meiser on the rest of the pile, even though you have a mixture of this year and last year. That's the second halacha. That was a machlokes of Shimon Shazuri and the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan said you can't do that. Rav Shimon Shazuri said you can, and Shmuel paskin like Rav Shimon Shazuri that you can. The third halacha is that all seeds follow their full growth. That is the defining moment for seeds as to which year they belong to. So the Gemara says you need all these halachos. If he would have only said that there's no halacha of mixture, that dry ingredients you have to assume are not mixed, so you would assume that he therefore doesn't hold like Rav Shimon Shazuri. Rav Shimon Shazuri says you can take a scoopful on the rest of the mixture. That's because he holds that they're all mixed. So you would assume he does not hold like Rav Shimon Shazuri. Now, if he would only say the halacha that he holds like Rav Shimon Shazuri, that you're allowed to take a scoopful and use it to take meiser on the rest of the mixture, you would assume it's because he holds that they are mixed. He doesn't hold of either of them. So you had to say both of those halachas. Now, if he only said those two, we wouldn't understand how he arrived at these two conflicting psakim. On the one hand, he says that they're not mixed. On the other hand, he says you're allowed to take a scoopful and assume that it has both ingredients. Therefore, we need him to say the third halacha, which is that the reason he holds like Rav Shimon Shazuri is not because they're mixed. It's because he holds that all seeds are determined which year they belong to by the end of their growth. In the case of Rav Shimon Shazuri is where their 1/3 growth was right at the border between the 2 years, and therefore some of the fruits were 1/3 grown before Rosh Hashana, some were 1/3 grown after Rosh Hashana, and that's why they were mixed. Shmuel holds there's no mixture here. These are all considered to be fruits of the later year. They're all considered to be produce of the later year because they are defined. Their defining moment is when they are fully grown, and they were all reached the stage of fully grown in the later year, not in the earlier year. And that's why he holds that way. Now, says the Gemara, what about if he would have only said the halacha is that the stage is determined by the full growth of the fruits? Then I would have known how he paskins. I would have known that he holds that you're allowed to take the mixture as meiser. So why does he have to say more than that? Because then I would have thought that he holds that halacha is true even for grain and olives. Now, grain and olives are not true. Grain and olive goes by 1/3 growth. Therefore, I needed him to tell me that halacha is like Rosh Hashana Shazuri, and then I understand that it's got to be for a different reason because of the growth of the fruit, and I also understand that it's only in the case in which Rosh Hashana Shazuri was discussing that he holds that way. It holds halacha is like Rosh Hashana Shazuri because that's talking about seeds, which has halacha different than grain and olives. Seeds, it is decided by full growth, and grain and olives is different, decided by 1/3 growth. You need him to spell that out. So now the Gemara says, one more question over here. Why do I need him to say that there is no halach of mixtures? That if you have a mix of dry ingredients, you can't consider them to be evenly mixed, and if you have a scoopful, you have part of both ingredients in there. Obviously, he holds that way. From the fact that he paskins like Rosh Hashana Shazuri, and he says that he's paskining that way for a different reason, means he holds that you take a scoopful, you don't necessarily have both ingredients in there. Why do I need him to spell that out? I need him to spell it out because he said that in liquids you do hold that way. If he would have not spelled out how he holds, I would have thought that even in liquids he doesn't hold the way he holds, that it's not evenly mixed. Therefore, I need him to tell me so explicitly. Okay, so that concludes the Gemara's discussion about Shmuel's halacha. The Gemara now returns to the list of produce and when their defining moment is to determine which year they belong to. And the Gemara wants to talk about vegetables. Vegetables go by when they are picked off the tree, not by anything else. And the Gemara wants to know where you know that. So the Gemara gives two sources. One is brought by Rabbi Akiva, and one is brought by Rabbi Saglili. They both learn from the same pasuk, which compares gatherings to grain and grapes. Grain and grapes are chayavin, meiser, and truma midairaisa. Other types of gatherings are only midrabanan. The Gemara brings the pasuk which says ba'asbacha migarnecha u'miigvecha. The Gemara says it's linking asbacha, all other types of gathering, all other types of bringing in fruits or produce, to grain and wine, meaning grapes. So there's a connection between the two, and we learn from grain and grapes to other produce. The question now is how exactly we define the connection. What is it? What is the defining feature of grain and grapes that determines its halacha, and that we would apply that defining feature to determine the important moment of growth regarding vegetables. And vegetables is what we're referring to specifically over here, and what it applies to. So the Gemara says that is the machlokas of here. Rabbi Saglili says grain and grapes, their halacha is that it's 1/3 growth that is their defining moment. So what's significant about 1/3 growth? So Rabbi Saglili says 1/3 growth is when it's achieved its primary watering. It gets its rainfall, and in its first third of growth is when it really needs the water, and that's what makes it grow. So if you have a fruit or grain which is grown 1/3 before Rosh Hashanah, it's got its primary rainfall from last year. If it's 1/3 growth after Rosh Hashanah, it's getting its primary rainfall from the new year. So it goes by its primary rainfall. Therefore, the halachos of vegetables will be different, because you won't go by 1/3 growth. You'll also go by primary rainfall. Now, vegetables continue to grow and grow and grow, and they even regenerate after you pick them, and their primary rainfalls at the time that you pick them. That's what really ripens them all along. And therefore, you would learn from grain and grapes that you define a year by primary rainfall, which for vegetables means the time of the picking. That's a source. Rabbi Akiva says something similar, but slightly different. He says you go by what type of watering a plant uses. Grain and grapes, their watering is by natural rainfall. Other types of vegetables, their watering they have to be irrigated, they have to be manually watered. So the Torah is teaching us as follows. Something which has natural rainfall, then you would go by 1/3 growth, because the natural rainfall is what created it. Now, something which has to be watered by hand, then you go by the moment when it's picked off the tree, and that's how we define the difference. So what comes out of this machlokus is that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, anything which is watered, its primary water supply is what's needed in its late stages, that was when you would, a plant like that, produce like that, you would define its defining moment as which year it belongs to when it's picked. According to Rabbi Akiva, it would be whether it's irrigated or it's just naturally fed. So Gemara says, give me a case where there's a difference between the two. So Gemara says, here's a case. There's a type of small onion called a batzal hasris, or poa mitzri, the Egyptian bean. These two produce will have different halachos between the two. Now, which one holds which way? So Rashi brings different versions going each way. The Gemara adds, it has to be that it wasn't watered in the last 30 days before Rosh Hashana. So Rashi explains these types of fruits are only watered from time to time, and therefore you generally can go 30 days without them being watered. So Rashi brings both versions as to who says what, and that's halacha. According to one version, Rabbi Akiva would say this doesn't count as something which is irrigated, because you haven't watered it for 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, and therefore it would have the halachos of grain and fruits, of grain and grapes. According to the other version, so basically would say that this doesn't count, because you can't say that it's been fed by water in its first third of growth, because you didn't water it for the last 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. You watered it earlier than that, and it's just having water seeping in from the ground. So either way, this would be a difference between the two halachas. One would hold of this halacha that it's like grain and grapes, and one would hold that it's like vegetables. Okay, this concludes that Gemara's discussion. Now the Gemara moves on to the Rosh Hashana of trees. Now, trees and their fruit. The Gemara has brought out the Mishnah in the beginning, the Masechta brought out Machlokas. The Rosh Hashana is certainly in Shvat. According to Beis Shammai, it's the first of Shvat. According to Beis Hillel, it's the 15th of Shvat. The Gemara wants to know why these times. So Gemara says the reason is because the majority of the rain has fallen by then, and since the majority of the rain has fallen by that time, that's last year. Anything which grows after that is using next year's rain. And then the Gemara adds, and this is because the majority of the season, the winter season, hasn't passed yet. So the rain begins falling on the 17th of Cheshvan. The rainy season is the 17th of Cheshvan and ends the end of Nisan. So the majority of that has gone by. But the season, the Tkufa, which goes from Teves to Nisan, that is not majority gone yet by the 1st or the 15th of Shvat. So Gemara says, how does that explain why Rosh Hashanah should be then? If the majority of the season hasn't gone by yet, that's the reason that you should have Rosh Hashanah be later. It should be an Adar. Should wait till the majority of the season has gone by. Gemara says, no, what we meant to say is despite the fact that the majority of the season hasn't gone by yet, since the majority of the rainfall in the rainy season has fallen already, you can say that last year is now over. The watering process for these fruits has been completed up to that point. Anything which grows afterwards is growing on next year's rain. Okay, now the Gemara brings the incident with Rabbi Akiva, which discusses the halach of the esrig. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva had an esrig, which he picked on the first of the month of Shvat. First of the month of Shvat, that means that according to Beis Shammai, this is already next year. It's already Rosh Hashanah, so it's next year. According to Beis Hillel, it's still before the 15th, so it's last year. Now what did Rabbi Akiva do? He took Meiser from it for both years. It was a third year going into fourth year. So, and he took Meiser Ani with the assumption that it was last year, that it was third year. And he took Meiser Sheni with the assumption that it was next year, which is the fourth year, which is Chayav and Meiser Sheni. So the Tanakama, this is a brisa, and the first opinion in the brisa, which we've seen up till now, says the reason that he did that is because he was holding like Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. He wasn't sure if it was last year's fruit or next year's fruit. He wasn't sure if you go by Rosh Hashanah, if Rosh Hashanah for fruits is the first day of Shvat or the 15th of Shvat. So he took both of them. Now, there's a different explanation in the brisa. The brisa brings another opinion as to what he wasn't sure about. And this is the opinion of Rav Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. This has nothing to do with Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. He was not sure about something else. He was worried about a machlokes Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. That machlokes is, what is the determining stage of growth for an esrog? Does it count as a fruit or does it count as a vegetable? Why should it count as a vegetable? It's clearly a fruit. So the Gemara says, because remember what we said about how you define vegetables. The vegetables is defined by when it gets its rainfall. Estrogim get their rainfall, and its main rainfall comes later, and therefore Rabban Gamliel says that it counts as a vegetable. It gets its rainfall, its key rainfall is close to the time that's picked, and therefore, as far as which Meiser year it belongs to, it goes by when you pick it off the tree. It counts as a vegetable. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, it counts as a fruit, just like all other fruits. You're not worried about when the rainfall is. Now, the Gemara notes that Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer do agree that it counts as a fruit as far as the halachos of Arla, Revai, and Shemitah. As far as the halacha of Meiser year, there they have a machlokes. So the Gemara says, therefore, he wasn't sure. Rabbi Akiva wasn't sure which year it belongs to, because he wasn't sure. He picked it on the 1st of Shvat, which means it achieved 1/3 growth before. So it was 1/3 growth last year, and it was picked this year. He wasn't sure which year it belongs to, and therefore he did both years. He took Meiser Ani and Meiser Sheni. So now the Gemara analyzes the two opinions here. The Gemara says, first opinion doesn't make sense. First opinion said he did like Beis Hillel and like Beis Shammai. You're not allowed to do that. We know that the halacha is, we have a brisa that says that there's a baskol that came out, and then it said that the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So you're always supposed to do like Beis Hillel. Now, before the baskol came out, before the voice announced that the halacha is like Beis Hillel, you had a right to choose whichever opinion you want. But you couldn't take both opinions. If you took the leniencies of both opinions in the same machlokas, in the same issue, you took two contradictory positions. You held like Beis Hillel in as far as one nafkamina, one practical result of this machlokas, leniently, and you held like Beis Shammai in a different practical result leniently. So you're wicked. You're taking leniencies that can't possibly both be true. They're contradictory. The halacha is either like Beis Hillel or like Beis Shammai. And if you take both stringencies, so then you're a fool. Gemara refers to that as a fool who walks in the darkness. You can't take two contradictory positions. So how could Rabbi Akiva take two contradictory positions and take both meisters? So Gemara says, no, that's not a problem here. It's not that he wasn't sure if the halacha is like Beis Shammai, or Beis Hillel. He wasn't sure which opinion was Beis Shammai's and which one was Beis Hillel. He wanted to pass on like Beis Hillel as the halacha, but he didn't have clear if Beis Hillel said the 1st of Shvat is Rosh Hashana, or he said the 15th of Shvat is Rosh Hashana. Okay, the Gemara says, now let's go to the second explanation, which is that he had machlokes between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara says, according to this explanation, he was holding like Beis Shammai. Remember, this fruit was picked on the 1st of Shvat. Now, if you held like Beis Hillel, it was both 1/3 grown and picked last year, in the preceding year, in the earlier year, because it's not Rosh Hashanah until the 15th of Shvat. Why would he hold like Beis Shammai? Beis Shammai is the only one who says that it was picked 1st of Shvat. It was picked next year, even though it reached 1/3 growth last year. Then you would have two contradictory positions. Then you would have the machlokes between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer as to what its defining moment is. That would apply. But if you have like Beis Hillel, it's all from last year. It's all before the 15th of Shvat. So Gemara says what actually happened is that he was worried about the preceding year. It grew 1/3 before last year's. Well, the Gemara gives two answers here. The first answer is that this Esser grew 1/3 before last year's 15th of Shvat. It really sounds like Beis Hillel, and the Rosh Hashanah is the 15th of Shvat. This thing grew 1/3 growth before last year's Shvat, last year's Tu B'Shvat, and he picked it off now on the 1st of Shvat, which is after last year's Tu B'Shvat. Now the truth is, we would have the same question if he picked it in Cheshvan, Kislev, Teves. The fact that it was the 1st of Shvat has nothing to do with it. It just happened to be that that's when he picked the thing off. But it's really a question of last year's, and according to Rabban Gamliel, it's the preceding year, the year before last year. It's that year's Meiser, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's the immediate preceding year's Meiser, not 2 years ago's Meiser. That's the Gemara's first approach. The Gemara's second approach is to say that this version, the second half of the brisa, which says that they argued that he wasn't sure in the Machakas of Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, that's what he was worried about, but not Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. This version will also change the date. It'll say that nothing was Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, it was in Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer, and it wasn't the 1st of Shvat that this happened, it was the 15th of the month of Shvat. Okay, says the Gemara statement, the halacha of Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. Rabbi Bar Rav Huna says, according to the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, that an esrog has the halacha of vegetables, and its meiser year is determined by when it was picked, it has another halacha of vegetables, and the year that it's determined as well. And that is that its Rosh Hashana is not Tu B'Shvat. Its Rosh Hashana is Rosh Hashana, the 1st of Tishrei. So Gemara says it can't be. And Gemara says it can't be because I'll show you a brisa, which says that if somebody is picking esrogim on Erev Tu B'Shvat, it picks one before sundown and one after sundown, can't take meiser from one to the other because they're different years. Now, we're talking about picking here, so this is Rabbi Gamliel. This is not Rabbi Elazar, who says that it goes by 1/3 growth. That it goes by when it first appears, the fruit, not 1/3, when it first appears, like other fruits. So it means we're talking Rabbi Gamliel here, and yet it's clearly saying that Rosh Hashanah is Tu B'Shvat, not the 1st of Tishrei. So Gemara says, you're right. So it must be that the actual statement said by Rabbi Bar Rav Huna was the opposite. He said that even though it's like vegetables, the esrogim are like vegetables concerning what their defining moment is, and that it's and that it's defined by when you pick them, and not by when it begins to emerge on the tree. Nevertheless, its Rosh Hashanah remains Shvat like fruits, and not Rosh Hashanah like vegetables. Now, in this brisa we had quoted as a proof, it had said that the years were the 3rd year of Shemitah cycle going into the 4th year. That's strange. Last time we had a very similar brisa and said it was the 2nd year going to the 3rd year. And we need 3rd year in there somewhere, because 3rd year is the one that's Meiser Ani, and we're trying to define whether it's Meiser Rishon, whether it's Chayv Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani. But the first one says 3rd year of 4th year, and this one says 2nd year, 3rd year. Why is it different here? It's different because it's telling you something important. It's telling you that an esrog is not going to grow. An esrog tree doesn't grow fruits until the 3rd year. You're not going to have a second, third, like a second and 3rd year esrog. It doesn't grow fruits until the 3rd year of Shemitah. And the reason is that it's a very weak tree. And on Shemitah, a lot of people handle it, and it gets beaten up, and therefore it doesn't provide any more fruits until the 3rd year. So you got to be careful with your esrog tree. Don't be too manhandling of it, because it's a weak tree and the handling is bad for it.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.